Last week, on Thursday, the church throughout the world celebrated the feast day of Pope St. John Paul II. I recall a few years ago, and it was on a Sunday, when John Paul II was canonized a saint, along with that other pope that no one seems to remember. I remember the excitement generated by the canonization of John Paul II, and in celebrating Mass that Sunday at the parish in which I was assigned, I asked the congregation in my homily, how many here are excited that John Paul II has been canonized a saint? And as Catholics are wont to do, they all applauded. Everyone was excited. And then I asked them further, are we excited because in this sex-charged culture that we have today, we are learning and reading John Paul II's theology of the body and teaching it to our children, most especially to our teenage children? Are we excited because we appreciate him adding the luminous mysteries to the rosary, and as a family we are now each night praying the rosary together and teaching our children the mysteries of the rosary and the luminous mysteries? Is it because we're teaching our children what John Paul II taught regarding the sanctity of all human life and an absolute opposition, because of our faith, to the practice of abortion? Or the absolute sanctity of marriage as a permanent union between a man and a woman, and our advocacy for that in our society? Let's just say at the end of it, you could hear a pin drop in the church. And that church was carpeted. So profound had the silence got. Well, why, in fact, were we excited that John Paul II was canonized a pope? Because of his celebrity, because he was larger than life, because he brought the papacy into our living room, and in fact, some cases, some of us might have even been present at one of his talks, or maybe even met him personally and shook his hand or received his blessing. I know during that Sunday, pretty much every church had images, pictures of John Paul II and that other pope that no one remembers in the sanctuary to celebrate and commemorate their canonization. And in some cases, even the pastor of the parish had not only pictures of John Paul II, but pictures of him, that pastor, with John Paul II, to show that he had at one time been in the presence of a saint. But do we really remember what he said? What he taught? And are we incorporating that into our lives, the example and teaching of a Holy Father that many want to call John Paul the Great? I recall in 1987 when he visited the United States and was in Los Angeles, he engaged in a rally with young people, teenagers, the youth, in a location in Los Angeles that would also be connected live via satellite, which was a new feature at that time, to 3 other locations in the United States. And during that rally, students would come forward and ask him a question after he gave a rather long speech to them. They would ask him a question, and then from their different locations offer a gift to the Holy Father. And I remember on one occasion, the gift given by the youth groups, I believe in St. Louis, was the gift of service to those in need. And they offered a video of the work that these children from their parishes were going out and doing really substantial service to those in need. Now, earlier, John Paul II had answered a question that had been given to him. What can we youth do better to express and live our faith? And John Paul answered the question. But when this video was finished, John Paul turned to the student who was present in that location, pointed to the video and said, "Their example is a better answer than I gave you." Whereupon, as you can imagine, the crowd erupted. In other words, John Paul was saying, I'm preaching it, but they're doing it. And that is a better example and a better answer to your question than the one even I gave. St. Paul experienced that phenomenon with the people of Thessalonica, and we hear him say that in our second reading today. He notes them in the manner of his preaching, But he recognizes the imitation of his example and his zeal, even to the point of outdoing him as an evangelist and as a preacher. He says, "From you the word of the Lord has sounded forth, not only in Macedonia and in Achaia, but in every place your faith in God has gone forth, so that we have no need to say anything." Imagine the tremendous compliment he's giving to the people of Thessalonica. They have been so successful in receiving and living the gospel that it has made Paul's preaching obsolete. He doesn't have anything more to say. He has nothing more to add. They're doing it so well, and in fact, even better than him. What is a teacher to do when the students come to learn the subject better than the teacher? Or how about when children practice their faith better than their parents did, who raised them? And what's an evangelist or a preacher to do when their congregation lives that gospel and exceeds the preaching, so much so that the preacher has nothing else to add? Now, in many parishes, there oftentimes can be known for a priest who was assigned there, usually a beloved pastor, fondly remembered, so fondly, in fact, that his name is virtually synonymous with that particular parish itself. I've known a few in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, where I grew up, knew quite a number of them there. So that one can rarely speak of that particular church without thinking of that particular priest, that aged Monsignor. But how many parishes do we know of are known for the reverse? Not for the priests who have served there, but for the people who have lived that faith. That people who have responded to their faith in such a way that they basically outdo the priests and religious who are there to serve them. How many parishes eclipse the priests and religious assigned to them because they're so strong in living their Catholic faith and so dedicated in spreading it, so zealous in living it? And I mean everybody, if not the vast majority, not the few select people who are always involved and always present. Everybody. That they even do it better than those who lead them. How many priests and religious can say that of their parishes? The volunteerism here is so high. The masses and reconciliation services are so full. The lay evangelization so strong. The CCD and religious education programs are so effective. The people are so punctual in prioritizing going to Mass on Sunday. They teach their children to behave. They dress properly. They're living and they're teaching of that faith to their children. So efficient and consistent. They so project the love of the gospel that I, as your pastor, have nothing more to add. How many parishes do we know in which that's the case? How many catechists can express that similar sentiment about their students? How many Catholic parents can say this about their children and grandchildren? How many priests can say this about their parishes, as John Paul II said to that young person in his presence, that their example is a better answer than what I gave you in my words? St. Paul is truly lavishing praise on the people of Thessalonica. And it challenges us to ask ourselves, what makes a great saint? But even more importantly, what makes a great Catholic? Are we constantly asking questions about our faith, or do we use the resources at our fingertips on the internet, something Catholics have never had in the history of the world? Are we so overreactive to anything we see or hear? Something a priest doesn't say, we immediately fire off an email of complaint. Or we hear something the Pope may or may not have said over the course of the week that immediately we have to call the parish, write to the bishop, and stew over what's happening to our church. Or are we the kind of people whose solid strength of faith is such that we could simply look it up on our own, look into it, draw those conclusions, and realize it's not what was communicated to us? Are we people who can experience difficult times, such as this past pandemic, and still come out the other side with a strong and perhaps even stronger faith and a stronger resolve to worship and celebrate our faith in the Eucharist as we come to Mass. Perhaps even so strong that we take it upon ourselves to invite someone who hasn't been to Mass in years to return to church with you now that this pandemic is over. How can you outdo your priest? How can any of us outdo our bishop? How can the church throughout the world outdo our Holy Father? Not just in celebrating a celebrity, but listening to the words of the gospel as they preach it and present it to us, to really make it a part of our lives and a substantial reality that we live each day. And pray that in this Eucharist we can grow more and more in that zeal, that strength, and that substance of our faith, so that our leaders, like St. Paul, could say, nobody does it better, not even me. You are so good. Your zeal has gone so forth, so strongly, that we have nothing more to say and nothing more to add.